Welcome. We're glad that you can make it here today for Perspectives. It's always nice to see everybody at this time of year. We tried to make the weather work, but couldn't do that. We're hopeful, but nonetheless, thanks for showing up today. I know you've got many more important things to do and you need to get stuff done, so we're really appreciative that you can make it here today. A lot of stuff going on. Fabulous keynote speaker that we're going to find out about in just a second. But if you have your program, note that there's a bunch of stuff that you might be interested in to pick up during the day. We're looking at disciplinary perspectives on social justice, innovative assessments. So if you ever wondered, what can I do differently? We're going to show you a session on that. There's a session on faculty-librarian collaboration, and something on mental health and wellness in the classroom, which is absolutely important as well. So please check those out. And also, I'd like you to note that during the morning, out in the lounge area there, where you're getting your coffee, you'll see some of the various kinds of presentations going on, posters, displays, and so on. One's on copyright at Western, which you might be interested in, so check that out. Western's active learning space, the Walls room, so that might be interesting to have a look at. And also something on community engaged learning. So if you're interested in any of those, it's out there. Grab a coffee, have a look, and you'll be very interested in seeing that. So I know that all of these things are going to be very, very important to you. Quick note that will come up behind me as well is the Unties conference. This is an unconference, so you can unregister anytime you like. And I hear that it's full, but it's on Twitter, right? So there's a Twitter feed going there that you can find out about as well. To begin, I'd like to invite John Dirksen to come up, the Associate Provo, and give us a few opening remarks. John.
Thank you very much, Mike, and welcome to everyone. It really is a delight to see this room almost full again, and I always think these are such highlights, at least for me, to see all of the ideas that are brought forward here and sort of state of the art, what's going on in curriculum and pedagogy. So I'm so glad that you're here to participate in this state. Over the years, Western has put all of this experience on the student experience, of course, and historically, a good bit of that focus has been on the extracurricular and co-curricular side. But as we move forward, we're seeing more and more focus also on the academic learning experience and student success in the classroom as well. And so there are a bunch of neat initiatives in support of that. And actually, Mike just mentioned the Walls classroom. That's new this year, the Western Active Learning Space. And if you haven't had a chance to check that out, you should. I think it's a really exciting space that's over in the UCC. And it's set up for, with lots of technology, but the whole idea is to engage our students in active learning in a different way. So that's a really neat development just this last year. Actually, thinking about students too, STELI, the National Conference on Teaching and Learning in Higher Ed, they've started a new award. I think this is the second year now, an award for students and student leadership in learning as well. And so they offer 10 of these 3M student awards every year. Western got 2. Our students got 2 of them. So I'm sorry, some provinces had to be left out, I guess. But I thought it was great. It's a reflection also, not just on all the work that we do, it's on the input side for the student experience, but it's also what are our students taking away from it. So I think that's just another exciting bit. The other neat development this year that at least I was really excited to see was an expansion of our Teaching Fellows program. You know that a couple of years ago now, the Provost had set aside some funding for a Teaching Fellows program to cover, I think, 5 Teaching Fellows at that time. The idea was ultimately to be able to have a Teaching Fellow from almost each faculty. And the idea of this is, it's a secondment in a sense, some teaching release to focus on scholarship of teaching and learning, and also to provide that link with your faculty and your collection of disciplines with respect to teaching and learning. And so now, through this last cycle, the Provost has extended funding for this program. So now we have 10. So there's a call out right now for 5 more Teaching Fellows from the faculties that weren't represented last time around. And so I just encourage you to have a look at that. If you haven't seen that call, track it down. It must be on the Teaching Sports Center website. Track it down. We'd love to see any interest that you have, or colleagues who might be interested just to participate in that. So look, it's an exciting day of sessions, as Mike mentioned, and I'm really looking forward. I had a chance to have a little conversation with Matthew already last night, and I'm really looking forward to your talk, Matthew. And I think it'll be an exciting day of sessions. So thank you again for coming, for your participation, and I hope you have a great day.
Just a couple of other quick announcements and organizational kinds of things before we get started here. One is to note that Fall Perspectives is coming up, and this is on Wednesday, September the 2nd. It's written for me, you are the keynote. So apparently I'm the keynote speaker. I'm going to be talking on the new science of learning. We got this finally figured out now. We know what it's all about, so I'm going to talk about that. So Wednesday, September 2nd, 2015, please come to Fall Perspectives. I'd like to thank the ITRC students. They're great. Please give them a hand. They're fantastic at doing all of this stuff. They're recording the keynote and plenary sessions, and then we also post this on the website. So if you want to go back and check that out, you can find that again. I should also note that ITRC, they're fantastically helpful if you want to navigate any of the OWL stuff, including all the new OWL system changes that are out there. They also accept proposals for year-round development of computer-based instructional stuff. So if you've got an idea and you'd like some help developing it, contact the ITRC. They can help you with that, send you in the right direction. They know what's going on. Speaking of developing things, we offer a fellowship in innovation, and we've been doing this for, what, 5 years now? 4 years? 10 years? Long time. Long time. Time goes fast. This year's winners, and basically people put proposals together for a different kind of approach to doing some kind of instruction, and we get a bunch of proposals every year, so if you're interested, please have a look at the website. This year's winners, and they are right here with us, Richard Booth, Barbara Sinclair, please, right here. And before we start talking about that, I'd like to also recognize Laura Brennan, who's, I believe, right over there as well. Did she make it? She didn't? Okay, well, we recognize her anyway. Who was very helpful in doing this. I'm going to read you the name of the project. Medication Administration of the Smart Computerized Provider Order Entry, CPOE technology, generating and evaluating teaching learning best practices and simulated clinical practice. Ooh. If you're wondering what that's all about, it's all about computerized method of med administration. And for those of you who have ever been in hospital know that you often get med administration based on, which I finally learned how to paper, it's called treeware. Treeware. So we get treeware stuff, but they're doing software, which is a whole lot better. And so please check that out. Hopefully next year they'll be able to talk about that a bit and tell us about the results of their project. And now, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Matthew Ouellett. Matthew, it was interesting, he said, oh, Matthew, you must be from Quebec. But he's sort of from Quebec. He told me he was born in New Mexico. It's close. No, but your mother's Quebecois. Father's Quebecois. Okay, so hence the relationship there. Matthew is currently the Associate Provost and Director of the Office for Teaching and Learning at Wayne State University, which is right downtown in Detroit. And so he's running the program there. He's been there for a year and a half, 2 years, close. And he's starting up that program. A lot of growing pains, a lot of stuff that he wants to get done. So he's really trying to do that. He's got a lot of experience because previously he was the leader director of the Center for Teaching at UMass Amherst, and served as the president of the Professional Organizational Development. That's the POD network in higher education. It's kind of like STLHE, only broader, and a lot of educational developers are involved in that. Over the past 2 decades, he's taught a range of undergraduate and graduate courses on social justice-related topics and college teaching at various universities. His publications focus on the themes of social justice and equity in higher education, and multicultural organizational development, and also faculty development. Co-authored over 40 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, including the Chicago Handbook for Teachers, Teaching Inclusively, Resources for Course Development and Institutional Change in Higher Education. And today, he's going to tell us what we can do about that and how we can hopefully accomplish the future. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Matthew Ouellett.
So, good morning. I just want to check a couple of quick assumptions. Grades are in. Show of hands, grades are in. You would know if you did it. Okay. Classes are over. Yes. So, okay. What are the rest of you doing here? No, just kidding. It's a complete pleasure to be here this morning, and I want to thank Dr. Deb Dawson and the staff at the center for being such warm and kind folks, and thank you for the warm welcome. I appreciate it. So having just filed grades and just wrapped up the semester at Wayne State University, it strikes me that one of the things we rarely have an opportunity to do is just stop, take a deep breath, and lift things up to a higher level. So we get sort of a 10,000-foot view of what we do. Usually we're on a day-to-day basis so busy running from classes to meetings to childcare to all the other kinds of demands on our personal and professional lives that I'm hoping this morning will be an opportunity to just set most of that stuff aside for the moment, just for an hour, 10, 15 minutes, and think about what are some of the biggest issues guiding us in higher education today. Let me begin with saying I don't have an answer. So if you're waiting for an answer, go get coffee. But I think together we can formulate some ideas about how to go forward, how to think together. That's really what I'm most interested in. So I'm going to assume that when you came in and sat down, you sat down next to somebody who looks nice, right? Show of hands? Yes? Okay. This would be a good time to raise your hand whether you thought so or not. So clearly there's an invisible line here. Okay. What I'd like to start off with is I'd like you to turn to someone you don't know. And my guess is that you sat next to someone you do know. So I'm on to you, okay? I want you to look around. And this might mean turning to someone behind you. I'd like you to introduce yourself and share one thing that you had to set aside to be here this morning. Okay? So pick a new person. Let me give you a little criteria. Look for someone compassionate. Introduce yourself. Session, you'll have met at least one more new person. And it's striking to me how often we go through our days really only interacting with maybe 10, 15 people. People in our department, people in our program, people in our office. And even if we work on a campus with 20,000 people, we get into these silos, as do our students. So it's very important to take every opportunity to break out. If you felt very good about the conversation, tell the person your real name and your email address. So hopefully it'll extend. Okay, so we're on way. Here we go. Excellent. Okay. So I want to think for just a moment about what works in teaching. What works and how do we know it? So what I'd like you to do is to just take a moment and think just quietly to yourself about one of the ways that you know as an instructor when things are going well in your classroom. What's your litmus test? What is it that you know, okay, things are going just fine? What's the evidence of that, or the behaviors of that in the classroom? Okay, turn back to that person you just met and share with each other what those litmus tests are. How do you know when things are going well? Actually, if I could just insert one brief second direction. Yeah. Good morning. Welcome back. I just want to cue you that there's a second question. I want you to keep talking, but now shift the focus from you as an instructor to your students. How do you know, what is the evidence or the behaviors that indicate to you that students are really engaged? Okay, it may be part of the same first question, but it might be different. So go right back to your conversations, but spend a couple minutes thinking about this from a student perspective. How do you know when they're really engaged? Okay, so who learned something new? Oh, great, awesome. In the back, in the blue sweater, please.
Oh, what did I learn?
Yes. Oh, if you're willing to share it. If it's private, that's okay too. So.
No, I haven't quite synthesized what I learned.
Okay. Okay. We'll come back. Okay. What did you learn?
We talked a lot about making sure that students understand it, both relevance and expectancy.
Absolutely.
And profs tend to focus on relevance when they're teaching, but we don't focus on expectancy. So students are nervous and anxious about not being able to learn something, and we don't think about reassuring them that they can learn it, and we wouldn't give them this topic if we didn't think they were capable of it.
Absolutely. Could everyone hear that? So as we go forward, if you'd stand up and shout it out, we'll run around later with mics, but for the moment. So our colleagues suggested that one thing to think about was the fact that faculty often think about relevancy, but not often expectancy. And I'm just about to ask her what she means by expectancy, which you started to say is?
Expectancy is whether or not a student believes that they can accomplish successfully the task that you put before them.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense, yeah. Yeah. Many faculty start with, what are we going to read? What are the big ideas? That's just how we're built. That's how we're socialized. Absolutely. What else? I saw a bunch of other hands. Oh, they're shy. Let's go find them. Okay, what's one thing you learned, something you learned from this discussion this morning? Just because I stand by you doesn't mean you have to talk, but please.
And I think the students have to understand why sometimes you're using the methods that you're using to try and engage them, especially in some of the health science, maybe clinical kind of programs where they have to use that skill clinically because they're anxious to engage sometimes.
Absolutely. So students really benefit from knowing why you're teaching things with the methodologies that you're doing them, if I get that correctly. Okay. What else? See, oh, please.
Discussed that, or agreed that there are two kinds of indicators, short-term indicators and long-term indicators. This is regardless of what kind of indicators a teacher thinks they are best for his subject, okay? But they both need to be taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So learning has both short-term and long-term indicators, and you want to be looking for a balance of those, both, absolutely. Now we're over here. What else? Please.
The one thing that came up in our discussion was that students, you want to look for a change in their behavior.
You want to look for a change in their behavior. That's a really good indicator in most disciplines. I know in social work, that's all I'm looking for is a change in behaviors typically. Yes?
So what kind of change in behavior?
What kind, for your discipline or your example?
For me, I'm a music librarian. So in a graduate research methods course that I taught, it was when I would see a connection between a concept that I brought up in class and students being able to find a relevant example in their own experience, and then we'd try that activity in the class right there, and they'd see how a technique or a tip that I gave them would help them in that search and in future searches. Makes a lot of sense. Could you hear that on the far side? Pretty well. Okay, good. Absolutely. So I love that. It's fairly discipline specific. It's behavioral. It's what we call an education scaffolded. You give them a variety of tasks that with increasing difficulty or challenge. Absolutely. One more, please.
Affect, the emotional component, the way in which
Absolutely. The affective component. How many domains of learning are there? Are you familiar with the concept of domains of learning? All right, this is perfect, excellent. So our colleague here has mentioned the affective, which is one of the 3 domains. Affective being the emotional state, a raised state of feelings. What are the other 2? Donna can't answer because I know she knows this already, but say it out loud. Cognitive, absolutely. That's typically the first thing we go for, the cognitive domain, the knowledge. And then what would be the third? The physical, absolutely. Experiential. So these 3 domains are work that came out of the University of Chicago in the 50s with Bloom and his colleagues. You've probably heard of Bloom's taxonomy. You might have. If you haven't, I encourage you to go find it. I bet Deb would have a ton of resources on it. So how many folks here in your spare time have a chance to watch TV? Just a little. Anybody? Show of hands? Oh, come on, admit it. Absolutely. All right, so what's consistent across all TV shows? What do you always get no matter what you're watching? Commercials. Exactly. So what does a commercial do? What's the purpose of a commercial?
Louder volume.
I'm sorry, say
It
again.
has louder volume.
Louder volume. For some of us, that's helpful. Absolutely. It's what? What's the purpose of a commercial? Exactly. To persuade you to do what? Buy something, exactly. This is not rocket science. This is low-hanging. No trick answers here. The purpose of a commercial is to get you to do something kinesthetically. They want you to take action. They want you to buy something. So what are the other 2 ways typically that commercials do this? How do they achieve getting you to buy something? They provide information, but be more specific. What kind of information? Now I do need louder volume.
What the product is and why you need it.
Exactly. But is it just any product? No, it's their product. They want you to buy their product. So they give you a lot of information about their specific product. And what do they couch this in? Yes?
You'll be more beautiful, more happy.
Happy, beauty, absolutely. Many, many commercials do that. What else? Yes?
In some, there's actually no information about the product, and it's sort of something even bizarre for there to be an emotional association.
That's right.
So there's something completely unrelated, and then at the very end, they show the tag for that.
That's right. Like the Cialis commercial with 2 people in bathtubs. What? You know, I still do not understand that. Okay. So you're absolutely right. Sometimes what they're trying to do is just create a state of being, and it can be typically it's an emotional state of being. It can be, and it also can be an anxiety-ridden one. So often things around beauty are driven by anxiety. Look younger, look more beautiful, look slimmer, wear the latest clothes. So why are commercials so effective? Why do they work? Why am I wearing khakis? Every man in America wears khakis. I'm vulnerable. I'm as vulnerable as anybody else. Because when we work across all 3 domains simultaneously, we have a sustained, powerful learning experience. A lot of people are paid a lot of money. A lot of very smart people are paid an awful lot of money to come up in 3 minutes with something that works across all 3 domains simultaneously. They get you to know something, a product identification. They get your state raised, your emotional state. It can be anxiety, it can be humor, it can be nostalgia, anything that sort of gets you engaged emotionally with the goal of getting you to take action. So when I think about a model for excellence in teaching, I go straight to commercials because they have it down. This is, in many respects, what creates a successful, sustained learning environment, is engaging our students across all 3 domains. What is it? Yeah, so make sense? I'm not saying you have to turn your classes into commercials, but I think understanding how important it is to human beings to be engaged across all 3 domains simultaneously is really critical to success going forward. So anybody here familiar with the Higher Education Research Institute at UCLA? The acronym is HARRY. All right, just asking. every now and then someone has popped up in the audience who's actually from that institute, so I like to know who's in the audience with me. So essentially what this research group does is they collect tons and tons of data. And they're probably most famous for SERP data or NESI, sort of like NESI data. Do you use NESI data here? Yeah. So it's a version of that. It's a huge longitudinal data set on students. And if you pick up USA Today or some of those other magazines or journals, and it says college students today, all that data is typically pulled from the Harry database. So they do a end of high school, entering into college survey of students, and this is where they come up with all of these ideas about what college students today think. So Alexander Aston, who's a scholar at UCLA, took a huge data set and mined it to try to figure out what's most important in college, what matters most. And he came up with 2 things, just 2. What do you think they are? This is not, again, a trick question. Turn to your partner and think about this for a minute together, okay? Yes, we got a... Engagement with faculty. Yeah? What do you think? Sound reasonable?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Number one relationship that he found in the data for sustained perseverance, in this case to graduation, success defined as sustaining and persevering through graduation. Number 1 indicator was a meaningful relationship with a faculty member. So we'll come back to that. So what do you think the second one is? Yes? Good idea. Good idea. Hang on to that because we're going to come back to that, but that's not what came out of this study. What do you think the other indicator is? Yes?
If they ask a lot of questions.
Good behavior, but not the second indicator. What else? Yes? They're friends. They're peers. A meaningful relationship with their peers. So the 2 things that matter most, it doesn't matter how many PhDs you have on faculty, it doesn't matter the number of volumes in the library, it doesn't matter how beautiful your quad is or how fancy your sports center is, it matters that they've created a meaningful relationship with a faculty member and simultaneously have created a meaningful relationship with peers. Those are the 2 things that matter most. So if we walk away from this morning just understanding that what matters most are these 2 things, and we think about what the future of higher education is, I want you to take a moment and imagine out to 2030. What do you think is going to be still relevant and still important in 2030 to undergraduate success in higher education? What do you think is going to still retain its relevancy, still be salient, if you will? So think for a moment. What do you think will persist? What's most important? And talk to your partner. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do this. Okay, welcome back. Okay, folks. So the good news is you're going to have I hope you're going to have most of the day to talk about these issues. And if you talk about nothing else today but this, I'd be delighted. But for the moment, can we hear from some folks we haven't heard from already? What are some things that came up in your dyad conversations with the promise that there'll be no judging? Okay, you don't have to have a brilliant answer. You don't have to have any citations or notations. You don't need an abstract. It's just what's on your mind. What do you think will persist? What will be important? Yes?
We were discussing the growth of online education, as we all know, but we still feel, by 2030, the engagement of not necessarily one-on-one, but a human body in a classroom will still be important because it allows that interaction. I mean, you can learn stuff online, but I teach math-based courses, so there's things they can learn online, but it's tough to explain the difficult concepts in a textbook. So a professor or a live person would be able to do it. Plus, we're also talking about being in a classroom as we are right now. It's kind of a community, and if you're having problems, so probably there's a student beside you. So yeah, online stuff will continue to grow, but we're hoping, of course, that it doesn't replace the human lecture, not lecture-based, but classroom-based format.
Thank you. What else? Please.
We shared a very similar idea. We think while the form of education may change, we think the relationship between the faculty member, instructor, and the student will probably still be a critical element to learning. We did talk about the fact that education might be going to more of an applied type of route, and maybe that will become a relevant component of what education looks like in the future rather than what it looks like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. What else? Please.
I just want to make one comment. I have 2 children of university age, and what I find remarkable is their concern about employability.
Interesting.
So it's the thing you're raising. I mean, I think universities are going to have to accept the fact that the students want the practical as well. They can't just sit back and say, well, that's not what university is about. Whether it's cooperation with colleges or co-ops and lawyers in the community, but some way to link the two, I think, is so important.
Yes. So often on my campus, I hear faculty be a bit dismissive about that they just care about the job, that's all they want. But my attitude is with the changing economy and the changing workforce, who the heck knows what's going to be there in 10 years? I'd want to know. If I was an undergrad, I'd want some sense of a true north. So how many people here went through college without Google? Okay, yeah, okay. I know, bear with us, we're old, it's okay. How many people remember before there was Facebook? Yeah, when you had to call someone, remember that? Call me, Carly Ray. So, yeah. So it's hard to believe how much things have changed just in 20 years, in the span of time. I remember going through my undergrad on a typewriter. Those are now fashionable as decorative items. You know, you can see them on sets in movies, you know. So who knows where we're going to be in 30 years? I have no idea. It'll be someplace different. But what I think will sustain is that we will be in classrooms with each other. We have to be. Because there are certain things that we can do together as students and faculty that robots can't do or that automation can't do. And that's fuzzy problems. So this morning, one of the things we did, I think we're still going to be doing in 2030, which is to take complex, fuzzy problems and try to solve them. And we're going to do that in relationship to other people because we read each other in a way that I don't care how good the online platform is or how sexy the new app is, they're simply not going to be able to do it. So I think engagement and community are always going to be central. I could be wrong. I don't know. But I think this is what it's really going to be about. So when we think about community engagement, creating a sense of belongingness, a sense of being a part of the in-group as central to going forward, what gets in our way? When does that break down? So I'd like you to go back to your partner and think about in your own experiences, when have you felt on the inside, most on the inside, whatever form or group or situation that you want to pick, and when have you felt most on the outside? And think about those 2 attributes. What helps you feel on the inside and what helps you feel on the outside? Make sense? Fuzzy, vague problem. Okay, so I want you just to, whatever's salient for you, whatever's relevant for you. So you could pick the classroom, but my experience in doing this over and over and over again is that so many faculty have had horrendous classroom experiences themselves that they can't think of anything positive about it. So that's why I'm opening up the venue here. Whenever you felt most on the inside of a group, whatever group that is, and whenever you felt on the outside, whatever group that is. Make sense? Okay, you got about 5 minutes in a small group. So I wanted to ask you just to pause the conversation, and we're not going to stop it, we're going to come back to it. But clearly we have some strong experiences, some salient experiences in the room about being on the inside and being on the outside. So let's start with some of the attributes. Without telling someone else's story, please, let's leave that in the dyad. But what are some attributes when you felt on the outside?
Well, it's both the inside and the outside. I find when I share common goals and values with
Yes.
the people that I'm working with, I don't care how we get there, but if we have a common endpoint,
Yes.
then I feel I'm part of that group.
Absolutely.
But when I don't feel that I share, that I have the same values, the same things are motivating me, the same things matter, then I feel, and that's in my personal, volunteer, and professional work, then I don't enjoy myself.
So values and common goals are often driven by values, but so it's sort of a little bit of both, and it's personal and professional. I love that, absolutely. It's a false distinction to think that we're one person at work and someone else at home. Not true. You bring your whole self with you everywhere you go. Yes.
We talked about physical aspects of inclusiveness and exclusivity. So, for example, if someone is looking at me and making eye contact with me in a way that says, I invite you to participate, and addresses me directly, maybe even with my name, I feel included. If I'm not looked at, if a person's physical carriage turns away from me, I feel excluded.
Absolutely. And human beings are radar at reading that stuff. We are exquisitely refined at reading those verbal and nonverbal cues. Absolutely. Everyone is. Yes.
We talked about the communication as an insight of interpersonal communication. If they're not really willing to be open to other perspectives, then you feel on the outside. And if they are open to all kinds of points of view, then you feel included in the group.
Absolutely. The ability to sustain different perspectives, absolutely essential. The minute you think your perspective is not welcome, which often means your lived experience isn't welcome, as well as your scholarly work is not welcome, but it's often together, it's a huge shutdown. Yes. Oh, no, okay, in the back.
Talk a little bit about time. So when you come into the class on the first day, it takes a while. It may take a couple weeks into a new class or experience until you're feeling like you know something about the students and they kind of know your style and you sort of feel like you're rolling along a little bit.
Yes. So that's a great point. Can we just I want to expand on that a little bit. What do you guess is the time duration for students to make their minds up about what kind of course this is going to be? I've got 2 minutes over here, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 10 minutes. How many? 5 minutes. Quick. That's a safe answer, absolutely. I'm gambling with her. Quick. All the evidence, all the empirical research says within 3 minutes. Students have made their minds up. Is this going to be a good class? Is this going to be interactive? Am I going to enjoy it? Am I going to get something out of it? Does the professor like me? Do I like the professor? It's super, super autonomic. It's subconscious. It's almost instantaneous. Which is why all of your colleagues at the center say, whatever you want the class to be like, you need to start it immediately. If you want them talking, you need to have them talking immediately. If you want them to be engaged with each other, you need to think about starting that first day of class immediately with something that engages them with each other. Make sense? All right. So are we immune from this as instructors? I see one head shaking no. No, of course not. It's a human condition. We're hardwired. We are hardwired to almost immediately make instant decisions about who's in our group and who's out of our group. We all do it all the time. It's a basic human element. We are hardwired in our brains to do this. It's who knows what it grew out of, but I'm thinking safety. You know, who's in my tribe and who's not? Who's going to eat me? What's going to eat me and what's not, you know? It's just that elemental, and it happens all the time. We all do it constantly. It's one of the ways we get through the day. We can't stop and consciously process everything. We just can't. There's too much coming at us. There's too much that we're trying to do. There are way too many signals to stop and deconstruct every single one of them. So most of this is unconscious, and most of it's unguided or unintentional. Make sense? So how many folks here have heard of the term implicit bias? Are these my social psychologists? Excellent, yes. So what have you heard about implicit bias?
What have I heard about?
Yes, what do you know about it? Yeah.
Well, it's that it's implicit, so you're not aware of it.
Mhm.
That it's tough to change.
Mhm. And you're shaking your head. That's a lot of knowledge right there. Absolutely. It's super tough to change. It's often unintentional. It's often unconscious. We've established it's often very quick, too. It happens almost immediately. Something to add? I saw a hand back here. No? We got it all? We got most of it? Okay. Yes, please.
It also has a systemic negative effect on certain groups of people.
Absolutely.
Biases against people because they're women or black or, and we make judgments and then we stop connecting with those people in our classrooms.
That's right.
And like it was said back there, it's very hard to change. So even if you're acutely aware of it, the research shows that it's very difficult to stop doing those things.
That's right. It's very hard, and I want to normalize this. It's John DeVideo is a very well-respected researcher, a social psychologist whose work is mostly in things like this, stereotype threat, implicit bias. And I heard him speak once, and he told this anecdote about being in the graduate school library. I think at that time he might have been at Yale, I'm not really sure. Now this is someone who has spent his entire life researching these things and working in communities. He's a very strong social justice advocate. He went to go down. This is back in the day when libraries had books, and you had aisles of books. That may not be the case anymore, but he went to turn down an aisle, saw an African-American man at the other end, pivoted, and walked right away. Completely unconscious, completely unintentional. Stopped right in his tracks and said, what did I just do? What happened in this moment? So all of this enormous amount of cognitive work that he had done, still, there remains that memory or that shadow of socialization, that walking down an aisle towards an African-American man is something you don't want to do. He didn't want to do. So I want to make it really clear, this is not about how smart you are. It's not about whether you have a PhD in social justice. It's about living in our cultures. It's in the air we breathe. All of us carry this, all of us. I carry it. I could tell a number of stories on myself, but let me share one moment when I was in graduate school. I'd finished my dissertation, and I was at this cocktail party that my mentor, Bailey Jackson, was holding. And Bailey's a very large African-American man, but he's also one of the kindest, gentlest men I know. But he's got a wicked sense of humor. He's very, very funny, and it's pretty subtle. So we're standing in a group, and at this cocktail party are representatives of this very wonderful consultancy, and I really wanted to get a job with them. They have an office in Paris, they have an office in New York City, and they have I think it was Abu Dhabi or Dubai or something like that. And I was sort of like, these are my people. I definitely want to join this group. So I'm standing there, and Bailey Jackson's here, and at that time our department chair was William Cross, who's a well-known theorist on Black identity development. Bill's also an African-American man, but he's very light-skinned. Bailey's dark, Bill is very light-skinned. We're standing there talking, and one of the principals of the consultancy comes up. This is a very committed white Jewish woman, very committed to social justice, came out of the same doctoral program I came through, has written one of the foundational works on white racism. Very smart, very engaged, really, doing her homework, if you will, really walking the walk. We're standing there talking, and she hadn't actually met Bill before. And she said something, and it was clear that she was thinking Bill and I were white, as is she, and Bailey is African-American. I can't remember the details. It sort of all vagued out for me because it was so awkward. And I was thinking, wow, she's not paying attention to who Bill is. And then she made another comment, And Bill, at that point, stepped forward and he was very gentle. He put his hand on her elbow and said, I'm also African American, and I'm very proud of it. Kept right on talking, and it hadn't really sunk in. And so he said again, people in my family come in all shades. I'm African American, and I'm very proud of it. And it was at that moment that the light bulb went off. You could see it go off in Judith's eyes. And she was like, wow, here I go again in all my whiteness. And she just owned it, she embraced it, and she was incredibly graceful about it. And she didn't get defensive, and she didn't back out. She just said, here I go again in all my whiteness, making assumptions. And that was, for me, the integrative experience in my doctoral education. It was at that moment I realized it's never about avoiding mistakes, ever. We can't. It's too socialized. It's about having graceful ways to recover and to stay engaged, to own it, to say, okay, this was a moment when I made an assumption or I acted on an implicit association. Clearly I carry it. Clearly all of us carry it. All of us carry it. But knowing what to do with it is what's most crucial. Make sense? Yeah. So what I want is for you not to walk out this morning thinking, oh, I've got to be on my guard. I've got to be really careful and edit everything I do. What I really want you to do is have a sense of strategies to prompt better behavior, to prompt you to be your better self. Make sense? Okay. Because things will change, communities will change, our relationships will change, but I suspect our cultural socialization is pretty permanent. I wish I had more faith that it was going to change more quickly, but I doubt it. So I think getting some strategies to deal with these issues now will help us out through 2030 at least. Make sense? Okay. So one of the things I'm not going to spend any time on, but I'm going to put in the PowerPoint and I'll distribute it to you, is this list of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology came out with a report in 2012. That's the American president, of course. President Obama got a bunch of really smart people together and said, what are we doing around pedagogy, and particularly what are we doing around engagement and inclusion of a diverse undergraduate student body? Primarily, this is driven because we know we need more STEM graduates. That's the driver, and I'll just be upfront and honest about that. It's really not driven because we need more English majors. It's driven because we need more people in the STEM disciplines. So a lot of very smart people spent a lot of time going through the empirical research and identifying those pedagogical strategies that we know work. So what I want to suggest is we don't really need to invent any new pedagogical strategies. We need to use what we know works. So can you see the list? Pretty clear? All right. So if you just take a moment, flip through the list visually, and see if there's anything there you do. And I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many people do at least one of these strategies already? Yeah, not surprising. Not surprising at all. How many people do 2 or more of these strategies? Okay. How many use 5 or more of these strategies? All right. All right. So that's very good. Those are really good odds. Okay. How many use them all? Wouldn't expect you to. It's got to be disciplinary. It's got to be anchored to your discipline. It's got to have some appropriateness to what you're doing. But what we know is all of these help engage students, not just with us as instructors, but also with each other. And it engages them in the learning process in deep and sustained kinds of ways, because it's most likely to engage them across the 3 domains. And what are the 3 domains? Exactly. So what we're looking for here is engagement across all 3 domains. And there's one here that might not be self-evident. Just-in-time teaching, does anyone use that? How do you use it?
I make the students do a report on a case study, a 1-page, very quick report. I review them before class, and I adjust my lecture material based on what they get or don't get.
Mm-hmm.
So we spend a lot more time unpacking the concepts that they don't understand.
Excellent. Anybody here psychic? Yes, one person. Okay. Most of us are not psychic. Okay.
Just-in-time teaching, and especially when we teach in the clinics, if the patient comes that you don't see every day or every month or every 3 years, then we stop. Our clinic is 12 settings. We stop for 5-10 minutes. Everybody come there, so
Yeah.
to show
Love that. So it's applicable in a clinical setting, it's applicable in a classroom setting, and it doesn't need to be onerous or highly sophisticated. 2 or 3 questions, brief, checking for prior knowledge or comprehension or clarity, identifying the muddiest point, it doesn't really matter. But it works beautifully as a primer. It gets people thinking, it gets your students thinking about what you want them to actually engage with when they get to class. So the thing that I love about this too, and the connection to psychic stuff, is that you really cannot be expected to know what is or isn't clear for your students until you ask. And this is a strategy that releases you from being psychic. You don't have to be. You just have to have some strategies where you can ask ahead of time and clarify what is it that's most important for you to focus your time and energy on, what's least clear for them. Make sense? So most of these strategies have some attribute like that. So, parallel or crooked? How many people think it's parallel? All right, I love this, polling. How many people don't know? Not sure. Okay, how many people think it's crooked? All right, turn to your partner, explain your reasons, and see if you can come to consensus. Is it crooked or parallel? How many people, show of hands, think it is crooked? Show of hands. Okay. How many people think it's parallel? Absolutely, it's parallel. Excellent. Was it helpful to talk to your partner? Yes. Yeah, always, always, yeah. Okay, so all together, read the colors starting in the left, going down in columns. Together, read the color. Say the color out loud. Okay, all right, not bad, not bad, not bad. Okay, let's do it again, fast. Say the color, say the color. Okay, thank you. It was harder, wasn't it? Harder the second time. This is what we mean by deeply socialized associations. You see the color and you want to say the name of the color, not what's written. It's deeply socialized. So, quick explanation. I don't really have much more to add. We got a really good explanation from the audience. But what I want to underscore is that these are learned associations, they're deeply socialized, and they're really hard to change. So how do we change them? How do we move ahead in a forward kind of way that doesn't hurt people? So one of my colleagues, Buju Dasgupta, who's a social psychologist at UMass Amherst, put these 2 slides together, and I want to give her credit because it was really her work that got those designs out. But also, they're just a couple of quick things. She calls them mind bugs, because they get in our minds and they're very hard to get out. It really takes some overt effort. And, these are all the things that we've talked about. I won't go through them all together, but the slide will be available to you. But they're preconceptions, we're all vulnerable to them, and quite honestly, they're pretty ordinary. So over here earlier, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name. What's your name? Gracie made a point about the fact that they're not neutral. And this is the really essential part I want to get to, is that implicit associations in our cultures, since I'm American, can often really be quite heinous because they, in fact, skip past talent. They skip past talent and they focus on the visual. Make sense? Or what's assumed. So we don't really slow down and get to know what the real true talent is in front of us before we start making assumptions. Make sense? So One of the ways I think about this myself, and it's a prompt, I'm going to offer it to you, is I try to remember to give people the benefit of the doubt. That this is, again, I'm referring back to John DeVideo's work on what he calls new racism. The pernicious way that this tends to act out or manifest itself today in our world is not in overt acts of violence. It's typically not. I mean, there are certainly occurrences of that in classrooms and on college campuses, but mostly it's the withholding of helping behaviors. Make sense? It's that simply not giving the benefit of the doubt. It's not going that next step. It's not telling, that young woman about a fellowship. It's not offering to write a letter of recommendation for someone or writing a mixed, sort of ambivalent letter of recommendation. That's often the way that these kinds of biases show up. So it may not be an overt act or a commission of an act of violence, but it's often the withholding of helping behavior. So one of the things I'd like to have you consider is sort of creating some opportunities for you to have a set of prompts that help you slow down and make things more intentional and more explicit so that you don't as easily fall into implicit bias. Make sense? Okay. Anyone have strategies that you use already? Some strategies? Yeah. I bet you do. Oh, wait, I'm missing a hand. Oh, yes, please.
I cover all the names with sticky tabs.
Excellent idea. So you use blind grading, so you grade without knowing whose paper specifically you're grading. Excellent idea.
In classes, I often get students to prepare something to say ahead of time so that everyone has something to contribute before class starts.
Mm-hmm.
And that way it's easier for people to participate in the discussion.
Absolutely. So if you have introverted learners or people who are less likely to jump in or may need a little more lead time to really construct what it is they want to say, you provide them that opportunity.
Or who are just the people who traditionally get overlooked.
That's right. Get shouted down. Absolutely. Absolutely. So opportunities for people to pace their participation in a way that's more inclusive and that welcomes more people in. Excellent strategies. What else? So I bet you do more than you know. One of the things that we'll come back to this in just a second, but one of the things that I would suggest is that there's a lot of really good research literature on the importance of not grading when you're distracted or stressed. You are not distracted or stressed. I know. But try it, okay? See if there's a way you can slow things down, focus things, and be in a state of mind where you remind yourself that you want to give your students the best benefit of the doubt. Blind grading is one great strategy. Another way is, how many folks use rubrics? Oh yeah, see, very common strategy. So why do you use rubrics? You just use them, there's no reason, okay. Yes?
To try to standardize the process.
Standardize things, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say for fairness.
For fairness, right. For fairness for whom?
The students. And
for the students and for yourself, exactly. So using a rubric or a standard protocol is excellent strategy for your students, but it's also an excellent prompt for us. It reminds us of what we've already identified and communicated about what's most important in that assignment, what we've asked students to focus on. So we're far less likely to do a B- versus an A if we've reminded ourselves that the student is actually achieving what I asked them to do. This is exactly what I asked them to do. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. We're going to bump it up to an A. Make sense? Okay. Yes?
I guess the other thing one can do is I will go back and regrade because there's drift.
Absolutely.
I find even with the rubric, I've maybe typically become more lenient over time. And then, so the earlier students, I sort of have to go back and make sure I'm applying the same criteria.
Absolutely. Giving yourself enough lead time to even just flip through everything first, get a sense of lay of the land, and then do the really hard work of going back. But I love that as a great strategy because we also learn as we go. We get a better sense of whether people really understood the assignment and whether what our range is for acceptable rigor. So the other thing that I think is really crucial to do with both ourselves, because many of us did not get this in school, but also with our students, is to differentiate around mindsets. It's really important to communicate to your students that you have high standards, because you do, you're a university, but also that you have an expectation that they can do the work. They wouldn't have been admitted to Western if they can't do the work. That's a given. So some of your communications earlier in our session around high expectancy, calming their fears and anxieties, sending messages that yes, it's tough, but you need to, but I believe you can do it, So one of the things that, how many people here interact with people sort of like in their teens, 12 and younger? Anybody? 13 and younger? 18 and younger? All right. You got to get out more, people. So so one of the things I'm most struck by with my nieces and nephews, and now their children, is the lack of focus. They just, they go from thing to thing to thing. And I think I despise this American show called American Idol, not because of the music or any of that stuff, but because it sends this super wrong message out culturally that at 15 you can be a superstar. That's all it takes is just to stand up and you're immediately that caliber, your Grammy or Academy Award caliber or whatever. And it sends this really pernicious message that you don't need focus over time to get better at something. And in fact, for most of our students, they're quite capable of doing the work if they focus and if they put the time in. So sending messages to our students about the importance and for us to help them focus and to help them come back at things over and over and over again is a really essential way to break up some of these assumptions that they bring with them into the classroom and that are deeply socialized culturally. We really live in a world today where I think people have this very wrong notion that either I'm smart or I'm not. And anyone here who's been through any sort of master's level or doctoral level program knows at one moment it might have been about your acumen, but boy, it's really about perseverance. I dragged my dissertation for 3 years. It was just about getting your butt in the seat and getting the writing done. That is perseverance, that is not smartness. So communicating these kinds of messages out to our students are really, really essential. Thank you. So I'm going to send these forward. You can look at some strategies that other instructors have come up with, and they might, in fact, be things you're already doing. It wouldn't surprise me at all that you're already doing a number of these, but things that might be helpful. And in terms of diversity and inclusion, I think it's very important to send messages to students about inclusion. Knowing names, someone mentioned that, just knowing students' names, it sounds like it might be a bit frivolous, but in fact it's really essential. It's a very human part of relationship building. If you don't know my name, like I have a weird first name and a weird last name, and I count my best friends as people who get my first and last name spelled correctly. It's just a litmus test, and you move in or out of my circle of intimates based on whether you take the time to realize Matthew's got one T. I had immigrant parents. I had one T in Matthew and 2 T's, 2 L's, and 2 E's in Ouellett. Now, there are a gazillion ways to spell Ouellett. There are. In Montreal alone, there are probably 500 different ways that it gets spelled. But if you know me, you know how my family spells it. So I think those are the small signals, those little microaggressions that make a difference for all of us. So even armored with a PhD, I still watch what comes into my office. And my colleagues on campus, I feel like as an associate provost, if you want me to give you money, you better start with spelling my name right, all right? It's just that simple, because if you're not paying attention to that level of detail, I don't trust you with my money, So think about those things. So I want to end with asking you to think about 2 people who've been crucial or central, meaningful relationships for you. Someone who's been a meaningful mentor and someone who you think you've had a meaningful relationship with as a peer. Anytime in your life, this is wide open. Well, what I'd like you to do sometime in the next day is write them a note. Just communicate. Express your gratitude for whatever it is that they contributed to you and in your life. We don't stop and slow down ever enough to just stop and say thank you, to reiterate that human connection. So how many people have heard of Leo Buscaglia? This totally dates us, okay? So Leo Buscaglia was a professor at UCLA, and he taught a class, a large lecture setting on what? Love, exactly. So I think love is sort of an anarchic term or a subversive term in higher education, because most of our colleagues would love it if we just sent our brain in. They really just want your knowledge. But I think that as we go forward, it is really going to be about relationship. And we need to understand how it's important to us, who are the people who have been important to us, and honor that, and then also think about how we're going to share that as we go forward. So the end quote, too often we underestimate the power of a touch, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear, an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, all of which have potential to turn a life around. And this is the antidote to implicit bias. If we stop and remind ourselves of these sorts of values, that's the number one thing we can do to promote the kind of engagement and the kind of relationship building that I think is central today, but I think is also going to continue to be central as we go forward. Make sense? So take a moment, identify that mentor, that teacher, and then also identify that peer who you're going to write. And I really like the idea that it's not an email, but that's up to you. Make sense? Okay. So I know we're at time, and you've got a tight schedule, so I want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you this morning. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope I've been able to lift it up a little bit to the 10,000-foot level and give you some questions to think about as you go forward in the rest of the conference. So thank you.
We're going to try to take a few questions. I know we're sort of into the break, but we probably have time for one or two. Questions? You're talked out. I knew there'd be one. Go for it.
Okay. I'd like to give you a big hug, but maybe that would just be a bit weird.
I'm a hugger.
Okay.
Ask Donna how people are huggers.
I wondered if you could take maybe just a minute to reflect on how it is that we think about what we do in the classroom or the clinical setting. Many of us work in different areas. And how we come to know whether what we're doing is effective and how we go about assessing that. Because we have a system and an infrastructure that gives us feedback on what we do. But it strikes me, given what you've said, that the feedback we get isn't always going to be effective at accomplishing the kinds of things you've talked about. So maybe if you could just sort of reflect on that.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. So one of the things that the empirical research on implicit bias shows is we're super overconfident. We make mistakes all the time and we think we're right. So in terms of assessing feedback and making sense of it, implementing it in a positive way, the number one thing I think we can do is to try to act less individualistically. And again, I know this is subversive in a higher ed environment, but I want to recommend that you think about ways, particularly when you're grading or you're making decisions about hiring or you're making decisions about fellowships or committee decisions, to find more opportunities to think about who's not in the room with us. That's the first thing, just to notice who's not here. Ask yourself every time you go into a meeting, who's not here? Because I promise you, there will be groups that won't be represented. And just triggering that in our minds, are there any out LGBTQ people here? Are there any people of color here? Are there any women here? I'm in a number of meetings where it's all men. And I'm not saying that just social identity is all the perspectives that we want present, but that's a good place to start. The other thing is, if you're able to do this, I really encourage it, which is to find a teaching partner who does not mirror you. Someone who's not your race, your gender, your age, your sexual orientation, your religion, your academic discipline even, and to try to talk through what your rubrics look like or what your assessments look like, or in particular when you're doing high-stakes summative evaluations, in any, not just of student work, but also in your peers, in tenure and promotion committees. Oh my God. Stuff happens all the time in those meetings that just makes my hair stand on end, and I don't have that much, so But it's stopping and thinking about who to work with, who you might team with, just to sharpen your own thinking. Because this is the pernicious aspect of implicit bias. We think we're right. We think we're not acting out of bias. And it often takes someone who can see it from a distance to help us see it for ourselves. So for me, the big moment was team teaching with Edith Frazier at Smith College and the School of Social Work there for about 15 years. I learned more just team teaching with an African-American, Baptist, Southern, Black, straight woman than I learned in, I don't know, 8 years of graduate school. And it was deep and powerful, and it was normalized, because every time we got out of class, we said, okay, he said this and then she said that. What the heck was going on? And I know I jumped to thinking I know what's going on. I leaped to this assumption that I have a perspective that's right and true. But breaking that up or troubling it, you have a perspective, it has validity, but trouble it a little bit. Find a way to find someone who doesn't exactly mirror your thinking. Make sense? Okay.
Thank you. Time for one more question. That's going to be it. Stand up and shout. That would be you.
That would be me. Okay, good. Sorry, quick question about the pedagogical value of discomfort. Being in a situation, learning from a situation.
Yes, I have a ton of thoughts about that. This is why faculty will never be replaced, because that's highly complex, sophisticated work. And if you raise the affective level too much, people shut down. They withdraw, they alienate. I do diversity work most of my life, and the number one thing I confront when I walk into a group is bad prior experiences, terrible prior experiences. So knowing that people bring their whole lives with them into the classroom, it's very hard to gauge without first engaging with the group what their stamina is, what their level of resiliency is. And I think that can only be done by another human being. There's a great book out called Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. We're just about to put the 3rd edition out. I should say I have a very small chapter in it. It's not my book, but it gives you lots of pedagogical strategies for dealing with, for teaching effectively in environments where the affective component of learning is really central, and it's really crucial to both the long-term and the short-term success that our colleague mentioned about before. And I'm a big believer, you may not love it in the moment, but I've had a number of students come back to me 5 years later and said, it transformed my life. I didn't know it at the time, but it really changed the way I think and the way I practice and the way I live my life. So, yeah.
So it worked. I'm going to have to stop it here because we have to set up for the next plenary session that's in here. That's okay. I want to thank you for reminding us about the importance of community and emotion, because we forget about that a whole lot. We focus on stuff, but not that. So would you please join me once again in thanking Matthew with one T. Thank you so much.